Hello and welcome to the 11th installment of 5 on It News, a regular video blog that was meant to take the most globally impacting and riveting stories, condense them down, and give them to you in an easy-to-understand manner. My name is Edwin Leskin from Asheville, North Carolina, and there's not a whole lot going on today. I'm just going to jump right into it. The way the show works is that we start out with quick mention, where I go through and just kung fu out a bunch of smaller stories, and then we cover kind of the larger stories for the day at the end. If there is no larger story, then we might do a couple segments. There's one called My Little and there's also some analysis or educational stuff that can happen. We'll be working in new segments and new kind of offshoots of the normal program soon in the future. So there wasn't that much stuff going on today that I really wanted to comment on. There's lots of little stuff happening in the world, but only a few major things that I felt warranted, me letting you know about. Without further ado, I think we're going to get right into it and just go right into the quick mentions. It's probably going to be a bit of a shorter episode for today, which I think is good. Okay, so let's get to it. First thing that I want to talk about is we had spoken about the Department of Homeland Security bill, the fact that the Republican Party wanted to tack in changes to Obama's executive orders on immigration, which protects a lot of legal immigrants from being deported. Republicans wanted to kind of infuse changes to that into the Department of Homeland Security bill. Well, the Democratic Party wasn't folding on it, and they had to get an extension on the funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Well, today the bill actually did pass the House with no major changes. The immigration executive orders are not coming in. Republican House Speaker John Boehner, I think, is being railed by his party for not fighting stronger on this. But really, at the end of the day, there wasn't much that could be done. So this bill clear, the Department of Homeland Security is being funded. It's a bit of a roller coaster, apparently, getting it through. And I think there's a tremendous amount of kind of backlash coming towards John Boehner, and there's talks of a potential coup against him, trying to replace him. So I'll keep up on that. All right, so let's move on. I want to talk now. We talked yesterday. The big story for the day was about Boris Nemtsov, and he was a major opposition leader in Russia who was slain. And there was a memorial for him. This is a very short little thing, but one thing I missed yesterday is that like 50,000 people marched kind of in his support yesterday, and his memorial was today, and it drew thousands and thousands of people. This is still a very, very rough thing for the opposition party, very scary for a lot of people out there, but there's a tremendous amount of public support for him, and so hopefully this doesn't quell dissidents too much. The next thing I want to talk about, I don't have too much information on it, but I think it's very interesting. We have almost, in the mainstream media, kind of completely forgotten about the Ebola crisis that's going on in Africa. The way that the mainstream news seems to work is that when things are popping off and they're really fun and interesting, to cover, and they're going to get a lot of people looking at it, and they'll be covered. And then even if the problem subsists, even if the problem is continuing to move on in the future, the coverage just drops off the face of the earth for some reason. And I think it's because not as many people are interested in it. It's not fresh anymore. Well, Ebola is still a major problem in Western Africa, and there is a new conference in Brussels with all kinds of world leaders, and it's organizing to quell the outbreak and to stop new infections. And there's a lot of money that's going to be potentially flooding towards it. Hopefully there's some more structural, kind of analysis and structural implementation of true strategies that will work on the ground. I think there's a big disconnect in between throwing money at the problem and what really needs to happen on the ground from what I've seen in my research. So a new summit's happening. I'm going to do some more coverage when more things come out about exactly what that looks like. And kind of what, accomplishments they can reach together, these world leaders. Next thing I want to talk about is another very small story, and it's just about the fact that Sweden has become a safe haven for families that are fleeing the terrible conflict going on in Syria. Particularly, the story that I looked at was looking at a family from Aleppo, which is a town that has just been completely and totally almost razed to the ground. So Sweden has become kind of a safe haven for these people. Before we move on to the next story, I just want to, comment. I think that there's some stuff in the news. For instance, if you go to the news right now, you're going to see a lot of news about General Petraeus and him having these little black books and not giving them over. Stuff that is technically bigger line stuff and saying, hey, Sweden is, helping Syrian refugees. Well, just to anybody that's kind of new to the show, my criteria for the way that things work is I want to see nations coming together, or I want to see a major change in the way that a singular nation works, or I just want to give you something that, I think is extraordinarily important for you to know. I don't think it's extraordinarily important for you to know that General Petraeus had, these little black books of information, and he lied about having them. Even though I did just tell you about it. Okay, so let's keep on moving. Another interesting story to me, and there's not too much information on it, but I'll get into it. So a couple days ago, we were talking about the fact that the United States and Turkey were coming together to train the Free Syrian Army in Syria. Well, we have a variety of groups that we appreciate in Syria, and that we have contributed some weapons to in the past. Not training, no actual functional personnel or anything like that, but weapons. And so I saw a story about something similar to this a couple months ago, but yeah, this is another story with the same import. So basically, we had backed and given anti-tank missiles, different armaments to a group that we said was a moderate group. It was a favorite of the United States called Harakat Hazm. And it has now disbanded and has allied itself with the Islamist Shemaya Front, which is definitely not as moderate. So the reason that I bring up the story is that I think it spells, an interesting question is if we move in and we start training the Free Syrian Army and we start providing more weapons to the area, if certain elements of the Free Syrian Army crumble, if they branch off, if they flake off, I think that this could end up having some very interesting negative impact. Now, I don't think personally, my personal bias is I don't think that should deter us from trying to make an impact and trying to, help out those moderate groups there. But we'll see in the future if we're going to get more stories like this. Oh, this weapon, this group that has, these American weapons, these anti-tank missiles, or these tanks, or this, and that. Oh, well, now they're, aligned with the bad guys, quote unquote. We'll see how that goes. Moving on, I want to clarify on something yesterday that I wasn't quite clear on. I said that maybe, we talked about the fact that a group of Iraqi forces is going to try to retake the town of Tikrit. And they are going in and they're capturing towns all around it. They're going to go in and take this town back in Iraq from ISIS. So, part of this, interestingly enough, is that Iranian advisors and Iranian-backed Shiite militias are actually playing a key role in the retaking of this town. So this is something we talked about in the past. We talked about Iran, and we talked about the United States, and the fact that we might end up helping the same people. We might end up fighting alongside each other if this conflict goes, further and further in the future. Well, we have had to back off. We're not going to do any U.S. airstrikes. We're not going to do anything because we don't want to directly support something that Iran is supporting, even though we do directly support these Iraqi forces and these militias. We provided them training, and they're trying to take this town from, ISIS. This is exactly what we want to happen. And in the ramp up to retaking Mosul in April, we want to see them, making true military progress. But at the same time, because there are Iranian advisors, because there are some Iranian troops operating with artillery, and we are going to head and completely not provide air support. But we also say that it, quote unquote, was not asked. But I think that probably there's, more diplomacy going on with the fact that there are Iranian operatives in the area than anything. So another little thing that I wanted to point out before we get to our major story is we've talked a little bit about Libya. Libya is kind of in this haven where there's no true governance. There was a recent coup and just a lot of problems going on. Well, it is kind of becoming the new hotspot for ISIS fighters. It's kind of becoming the new hotspot for, all kinds of different Islamic extremist activity. Well, we have now identified that there are some extraordinarily important ISIS fighters that are in Libya, but we really have no authority to strike. It is a very popular place. Like I said, there's a bit of a lull in true governance. There's no security. But we don't have the authority to go in there and actually strike because there's such a gray area there. So this is becoming a safe haven. I'm going to stay up on Libya and news about Libya. I like to take this conflict, as you know, and expand it into other areas. So those were our quick mentions. I'm going to go through and just give a quick little, recapturing of the headlines. I'm going to stay fresh in your mind. First thing that we talked about was the fact that the Department of Homeland Security funding bill did clear the House, and it cleared without any of the changes that the Republican Party wanted about immigration. Next thing that we talked about is the fact that thousands of people are supporting Boris Nemtsov, the Russian opposition leader that was slain in front of the Kremlin, shot down. And they drew out tons of people supporting yesterday's memorial, drawing out thousands as well. Then we talked about the fact that there's going to be a summit on Ebola, and the fact that the mainstream media is going to drop this. We talked about there's going to be a summit about Ebola and stopping infections in the future. And there's a lot of and it's going to happen in Brussels, in Belgium, and it's going to involve a lot of world leaders. And the fact there's a lot of money going to it, but really will that money, functionally help? We don't know yet. Next thing that we talked about is the fact that Sweden is acting as kind of a safe haven for Syrian families that are fleeing, the devastation there. The next thing that we talked about after that was the fact that one of our favorite kind of anti-Assad, anti-ISIS, anti-Al-Qaeda groups in Syria disbanded, ended up kind of joining up with groups that are less moderate, and they have a bunch of our weapons. And I kind of pointed out the fact that what does this mean for us training the Free Syrian Army in the future? It doesn't have any implication. It certainly might. Next thing that we talked about after that was that we are not going to help out the Iraqi strike on Tikrit, to take back Tikrit, because there are Iranian troops and operating artillery in the area, Iranian advisors, and because it was quote-unquote not asked. But we're staying out of that one, trying to stay out of the way of Iran. We don't want too much messy stuff going on there. Then we talked about the fact that Libya is becoming a safe haven for ISIS, and that we really don't have much to do there, but there's such a lull in governance there that it's kind of becoming this new hotspot. Okay, so we're going to get into our major story for the day. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I had mentioned that he was going to come and talk to Congress. So he made that talk to Congress today. And he basically said that, this deal that we're working on with Iran is just going to lead to them having more bombs. He says it's a very bad deal. We're better off without it. And that, they're going to, basically what the deal is, just so that you know, the deal works like this. Basically Iran agrees to go ahead and, stop their nuclear production right now. And of course, this production, they say, is all about, energy. It's really about nothing else. They just want to become a nuclear nation when it comes to energy. Well, they have to stop it for 10 years, and then over time, they're slowly allowed to ramp it back up. Now, there's some other things. Now, for instance, okay, there's some interesting interplay here. So Netanyahu came to Congress, and he said, this is absolutely horrible. This will lead to Iran having a nuclear bomb. 10 years is not that much time. At the end of that 10 years, they could have a nuclear bomb. This doesn't do anything to fix the problem, and Iran is like, the biggest threat possible. Of course, Israel is going to think that. Iran has been extremely vocal in their hatred, vitriolic hatred towards Israel, and if they had a nuclear bomb right there, it would be very bad news for Israel. At the same time, the interesting thing is that I want to point out that I think a lot of people are missing in the story is that this deal with Iran is really not necessarily going well at all. They don't want the deal at this point as the deal stands. And, basically what we want them to eliminate the ability for them to make a nuclear weapon. We want to kind of put a freeze on it. And then, 10 years down the line, they get to ramp it up. Iran, on the other hand, wants to have relief from the international sanctions that are, crippling its economy, basically. And, if there's no kind of lessening of those sanctions, they don't want to go through with the deal. So some of the speculation on how a deal might happen is that, there's just too much going on. I think they're talking tons and tons and tons, but there has to be some give and take. Iran wants it to, to get out of some of these limitations that have been imposed on its economy. They also want to, be fully recognized over the fact that they're just trying to do their nuclear program for energy, or so they say. There's been some other ideas thrown around, like maybe sending, the Iranian supply of uranium to Russia to convert the fuel down to low levels so that it would only be suitable for civilian power plants. So there has to be a low level of uranium for it to be able to be used for a bomb. Below a certain point, it just doesn't actually do anything. So Iran actually has about 20,000 centrifuges, and they balked at lessening those numbers. We're saying there needs to be a drastic reduction in the number of those centers. They don't really want to do that. So at the same time that Netanyahu is coming to the United States and saying, hey, this is a terrible deal, blah, 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 we're on the other end, and this deal is hardly worked out yet at this point. There's a lot of sticking points that are just not working for either party in the deal. So I think that's very, very interesting. Another thing that happened is that, the Obama administration came out and said, look, Netanyahu is basically just coming with all this rhetoric, and there's no actual solutions. There's no actual solution on how to move forward. He just says, don't do the deal. There's a lot of speculation as well, and a lot of analysis that, this is really just Netanyahu rabble-rousing, trying to gain a lot of support and, align more people kind of against Iran and in support of Israel. So, from what I gather, there's not, he says basically, what is the alternative? Simply demand that Iran completely, capitulate is not a plan, and no country would support that position. Okay? So, he said basically, we said that was our response to him. So basically, if you just say, okay, Iran completely has to stop, that's just not going to happen. We've been trying to get them to stop. They're not going to stop. So there's no actual, tangible, real kind of path forward here. This is Netanyahu standing in front of a conference and rabble-rousing to an extent, from all indications that it looks like. Of course, there was a tremendous amount of support from the Republican Party for this talk, and for a variety of reasons, for political reasons, obviously. So I think there's a lot of gray water. I just think it's very interesting that the leader of Israel came here and made this speech. I'm sure that there's a lot of PR and political necessity at home to do something like this as well. It's a very interesting story. It's a very interesting story that the Israeli prime minister would come here and have this speech that is not inflammatory, but that directly undermines President Barack Obama. At the same time, maybe he's betting on the fact that, I'm going to get into a lot of analysis here, I guess, or a little bit. Maybe he's betting on the fact that there will be a Republican in the White House next year. Maybe he's betting on the fact that he would like to come out strong-armed against Iran now, and then in the future, when it benefits someone's political career, a Republican, to come out strong against Iran, then he'll have a strong tie and a strong link and be able to accomplish more of what he wants to accomplish. there's been some crackdown recently on the way that Israel is talking about dealing with Hamas. Maybe in the future he feels like if he had a more conservative, hardline friend in the White House, that things like assaults on Gaza would not come with his strong rebuke from the United States. I think there's there's obviously huge political motives out here right on the front, but I think there's a lot of layers to why this is something that's advantageous for Netanyahu. And at the same time, it's just a very interesting thing. I mean, to come and directly, like I said, directly undermine President Barack Obama is just an interesting move to make at this time. Especially, as I mentioned, because the deal is not solidified at all. So interesting. So that's kind of our story for today. I don't have any real answers here. There's no real endpoint to it. It's very interesting that he came and he talked. I think that it's fascinating that this deal hasn't gone through yet at all, and we're having all of these kinds of issues with it. And I think there's some complex political motives here, and I'm going to stay up on it. Israel is absolutely one of the major world players, especially with all the conflict going on over there. It's very important to pay attention to what's going on in Israel. It ends up kind of informing the way that the Western world positions itself in terms of the Middle East and in terms of Islamic extremism as well. So that was the show for today. I hope you enjoyed everything, and I hope that it was helpful. We actually talked for 16 minutes, so it's a pretty long show. And, we've got Twitter launched now. I'm going to be going in and kind of following more people and tweeting out people with the videos. We got the Facebook launch. There's a tiny bit of funding seeded across all channels. I've had people reach out to me directly, multiple, in the past 24 hours and say, hey, thank you so much for 5 On It News. I really, really appreciate what you're doing here. I really like getting to know it. Also had somebody hit me up yesterday and say, what are you going to do? Just put a picture of the world behind you the whole time? I guess I could pull up a picture. I could have pulled up a picture of Netanyahu's face like I did with the guy yesterday. Oh, man, but instead we just got the pretty earth. It is how it is. So the channels are, going to get blown up, but I've had a lot of people come and say, hey, really, really appreciate this. If you really appreciate it, I ask you to share it on any social media channel, to tell your friends about it on word of mouth, maybe watch an episode with a friend, maybe send it an email. But word of mouth, letting people know about this, that's what's going to see this thing forward. I would like more people to see these videos. By the time we get to about the 50th video, I would, like to see, hundreds of people seeing each of the videos. So I'm going to chart this course, and you chart it with me, and we'll take this ride together. I hope you enjoyed the news today. Edwin Leskin from Asheville, North Carolina. Like I said, like, share, favorite, subscribe, follow, all that kind of juicy stuff that you can do to help things out and to stay informed. And I hope that you have a fantastic day. 11th installment of 5 On It News.